Hello, Mastering School here. Welcome to the Music Masterclass. So, for anyone that's new here, welcome so much. This is the weekly series I do on Thursdays where we mostly take a look at your music. I'll give you some guidance here and there and have you guys write music, and I am always happy to give my feedback on that music, and then we can all kind of learn together. And sometimes I'll do demonstrations of my own. But this next few weeks, we're kind of working on a little challenge involving duets, and so that's what we'll be focusing on today. So, again, welcome everyone, and thanks for all kind of checking in. I always love to know where people are checking in from, and just know that things are working, which reminds me that I do need to actually check. And let me just check the chat and see if anyone's saying, "Oh, we can't hear you," because that happens. But I like to have this on my phone so that I can be great. Okay, so yes, sound seems to be working. Everything's fine. And so let's get started talking about some music. So one thing I want to say, some logistic stuff. So I've been, as you have been gathering, moving the the main body of this course as far as what goes on other than this actual YouTube channel. I mean, the YouTube channel is great. That's where the live discussions happen. But if you want to be uploading your own music, the place to do it is on the community site that I have created, that I talked about, last week. I have been talking about for a little while now. And so if you haven't registered already, it's free. Just go in and make sure you have your account and can log in on the community site. The link is posted at the top of the chat here. And what I will say is, under the Music Masterclass, so at the sidebar on the left, under Music Masterclass, you'll see one space. That's what these are called, spaces. That's called Watch, and that's where you can actually check out the video and past episodes. There's another one that says Share and Discuss. And in the Share and Discuss space, my vision is that's where you can just upload random music that you want comments on, and we can, all kind of comment on each other's music. Anytime I've got kind of a challenge going where we're all kind of working on something similar, let's post that to the challenges group. And if you post to the wrong group, if you post to Share and Discuss, hope you don't mind, I will probably move it to the challenges group, because that makes it really easy for me to find the music that's relevant for the challenge, so I can, focus on talking about that anytime I want to talk about any current challenges here. So, so that said, we've got this duet challenge, and the idea with the duets was just I got it's always fascinating to me to write duets, and because you have a limited palette of things to work on. Now, if one of your instruments is piano, okay, the palette is not so limited, because solo piano is a very viable thing. But if you're talking about two instruments that can't really play chords, then it becomes a whole question of how do you create interesting textures and harmonies and so forth. As soon as you introduce piano, then, well, it's easy to create harmonies and textures, but then, now you have an overwhelming palette. And the question is, how do you actually create interesting music when you've got all these notes you could possibly play. So those are some of the things to talk about. But one of the reasons why duets are so fascinating to me is if you want your music performed, and that's always such a key thing for composers, not just to hear computer playback, but to hear real musicians play your music. A duet is great because, well, solo is great because then someone can play your music. You only need one musician. But a duet is, it's usually pretty easy to find two people. Anything more than that, if you want to put an ensemble together to perform your music, then it's a little more work. And if you already have a line on some ensembles that can, if you already have a line on ensembles that are willing to perform your work, fantastic. That's a great thing. But duets are nice and easy to put together. So I'm just going to start running through some music here and talk about what's going on. So this first one here is going to be one from Gijs Bikker. And I'm probably deviating further and further from the proper pronunciation, but I'm trying my best. This piece is for two trombones, a tenor trombone and a bass trombone. So it's a nice short piece here, I'm going to play it back from MuseScore. I have it loaded into, well, I don't have it loaded, but I have it saved. So let me just make sure I load these scores that here we go. I will load it into MuseScore so I can play it from here. And give it a moment. Not sure, did I? Yeah, it's just taking its time loading. So there we go. It's because I tried to load 4 scores at once. Here we go. Let's listen to this trombone duet here. All right, really nice job, and I love that, as a trombone player, you know how to write for trombone, and you have a good sense of things that are playable and not. I am going to actually ask you about a couple of things there that I might have personally hesitated on, but would love to get your input if you're here watching live. Um, and if not, then maybe you can comment for us later. So this, and actually, if we go back to where it is on the website, I thought he had a photo. Oh, it's here in the community site where he's actually got a photo of them actually playing there. So that's nice there. So one of the I don't know, there's a lot of different things that one can talk about. So one thing has to do with texture. I mentioned that when you only have 2 instruments, well, then what are you going to do texturally? Well, one thing is if you're writing a short piece, and this is a minute and a half long, that's a short piece, you don't need to have a ton of different texture. I mean, if you're going to write a 20-minute piece, well, then you're going to have to figure out, well, how can I sustain interest for 20 minutes when there's only 2 instruments? Because often one of the things that sustains interest is change of texture. And by texture, I mean, if you're writing for orchestra, you might have one section where it's just strings, another section where it's just brass, or whether it's just, 2 violins and a bassoon, or whatever. You have sections where it comes down to a smaller number of instruments, or you have a section where maybe all instruments are playing, but they're playing tutti, right? I talked about orchestra music yesterday in the cafe, and the idea that when all instruments are kind of playing the same rhythm but harmonized, that's a tutti section, Tutti, together. But often it's not that, right? We might have a bed. Maybe some instruments are playing a repeating rhythm, or maybe just whole notes, and then there's melody on top of that. Or maybe there's actual polyphony, where there's different things happening at once. Those are all different textures. When you only have 2 instruments, especially 2 just purely melodic instruments, it's that much more complicated to try to get different textures. And so just by having a short piece, you absolve yourself of having to worry about that a lot. And yet, Gijs is doing some things here where, like at the beginning of the piece, it's the bass trombone that has more activity, right? But later on in the piece, it's the other way around. Now, when you just hear this played back by a computer, it's not that impressive of a difference. You're not aware that it's different people. But when you're talking real musicians, especially playing live, now the sound's coming at you from a different angle. One of them's an actual bass trombone, which does have a different timbre. Plus, they're just played by different people who have their own personal style. So the difference that you actually get just by changing the roles of the instruments, even if it's ostensibly the same instrument, two trombones, you can get a surprising amount of textural variety by playing with things like that. All right, great that you're here. Awesome. So that's something. Now, there's another thing that you can do in terms of thinking about like the ratio of how many notes are in one part versus the other part. When you study counterpoint, there's this device that we often use to talk about it as sort of a pedagogical device. It's maybe a little too much made of it, but the idea of what's called species counterpoint. It's a term that has a particular meaning, and in my counterpoint course, I'll eventually be talking about that. I haven't done those lessons yet, but the idea that like right here we have what's called 4-to-1. There are 4 notes in the bass trombone part against 1 in the tenor part. Other places, it's maybe 1-to-1. Here, right, it's 1 note against 1 note. And what's happening here is no one sticks to that for a long period of time. It's sort of an artificial distinction, but we do talk about it in a counterpoint context in terms of talking about what intervals are considered acceptable and which dissonances we need to resolve and what are the ways we resolve them. So that idea of how many notes you have in one part against another is something that we often talk about in counterpoint just in terms of resolution of dissonance. But I'm more interested in talking about it in terms of texture, because what's happening here is that texture there of basically 4 notes here against just 1 note there, and then here it's 3 against 1, but whatever, it's a moving line against a fairly slow moving line here. That is a nice texture that is different really from what's going on in most of the rest of the piece. So if you are ever looking for a way of generating more textural variety, like to develop a longer version of a piece like this, you might want to have an extended passage, 4 measures, 8 measures, whatever, where it really is one voice doing half notes while the other one has the moving part. Again, in a relatively short piece, I don't know that you have to go that much out of your way to create these distinct sections. I think it's good that you just have the variety from measure to measure, and that the parts themselves are flipping upside down, not upside down, but who's moving and who's not. And then there's places where you do just have kind of 1-to-1 writing, and mostly they're at kind of cadential points, places at the ends of the phrases where you have that 1-to-1 thing happening, and that's a quite good way of organizing things. There's one thing that's going on in this piece that I'm curious to what extent this was deliberate, but when you're writing in 2 voices, that means you only have 2 of the 3 notes of a triad that you can represent. And there's many places where you're doing that in ways that to me are the sort of expected ways. Basically, what I would say is when you only have 2 of the 3 notes of a triad you can express, pick the 3rd and one of the other notes. Don't pick the root and 5th. Well, I don't say don't pick it, but when you pick the root and 5th, you're making a particular statement. And you make that statement a few times in here, and I think it's effective, but I want to make sure it's conscious. It's like there's this place here. So this cadence here. So we have B and D. So that's 2/3 of a G triad, right? This piece is in the key of C, or at least this particular cadences. There's other parts that feel more A minor-y. But so in a G chord, we have B, which is the 3rd of the chord, and D, which is the 5th of the chord. There's no root, and that's fine. When you're writing 2-voice counterpoint, it's going to be pretty common to have exactly that situation, a 3rd and a 5th of the chord with no root, because we want to get that 3rd in there. And the thing is, voice leading wise, this is good. Both voices got to move by step. B, to C, that's the leading tone to the tonic, and then in the bottom voice, it's D to C, the 2 to 1. So we have 7 to 1 in one voice, 2 to 1 in the other. That is the standard cadence of Renaissance music. So it's basically a rootless voicing in which the fifth of the chord is in the bass. It's not, you have to take yourself outside of harmonic thinking where we talk about inversions of a chord and when it's okay to use a second inversion chord. No, we wouldn't necessarily write this if it was writing for a triad in an SATB setting, but we absolutely do this when we're writing counterpoint. So anyhow, when I talked about the playability, so I have to ask this. Oh, I can't sing that low, right? So I know the extension of where you're at. I know a bit about the mechanics of playing trombone, but not a ton. So on a bass trombone specifically, this B is first position. I see. That's the thing, is I don't really remember. So anyhow, what I'm trying to understand, from my own education, is this line here, the low C. Where are we at position wise? How much motion are we actually talking about here? And from an embouchure perspective, does this line in that octave present problems? Because one of the things that I was taught is that once you descend into that bass range of the bass trombone, the stuff below the standard E there, all these notes here, that the navigability of the instrument is less. And so I'm sure you have a much better sense of that than I do, as far as how easy that is to navigate there. And so I'm kind of curious because I really want to learn that from my own perspective, what you think about how easy that is to navigate on bass trombone. So some of those observations that I was just making about the harmony and omitting notes from chords. Let me show you some of the places. So feel free to just type that answer in, and I'll take a look at it in a minute. But I'm just going to go on and talk about some of these other kind of cadence things happening. So this passage here, we have D and F resolving into C and G. So our final point of our cadence is an open fifth. And that's if you're going to use an open fifth. By open fifth, that's what I mean, the root and fifth with no third. That's the place where we expect to see it. The very beginning of a piece, the very end, or the very beginning of a phrase and the very end of a phrase. Those are the places where it's most effective to have these open fifths, roots and fifths. I will say that maybe you're leaning on them a little more than I might have for a piece like this. But if that's your choice, that's your choice. But I want to call attention to it because it does have a sort of a harmonic ambiguity about it. By not hearing the third. So if you don't have a particular melody that you need to be true to, and you're writing your own melody here, I'd want to hear what that sounded like if we came to an E. So I'm just going to play it that way. So that sound there of a third, or in this case, literally a tenth, that is a sound that you don't want to shy away from that sound. I mean, if your melody really, you had A, F, G, it's a solid melody. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying I improved your melody, but I am saying if you become concerned about the open fifths, you could consider changing some of them like that. Because here, voice leading wise, that really is fine. We have parallel thirds there, and that you can do that all day long, and people are not going to complain. So there's another really interesting thing going on harmonically. I'm going to play this passage right here. Okay, so yeah, that's what I was a little bit afraid of with the position 7-4-1-7. So we're talking right? 7-4-1-7. So did you actually play that in the duet there? Does that go okay? Is I guess then the question. Because yeah, that's what I was a little afraid of. That half step down low. I was envisioning a somewhere in there. We were talking a first position to seventh position, quick change sort of thing down at the bottom of the range where your lips are already, you're struggling to get that much air through the horn while you're doing that. And I just don't have a feel for that. And I want to learn. I want to know more about playing trombone and bass trombone specifically because it's a fascinating instrument to me. Um, okay, so oh yeah, I was going to play this passage right here. So this, first of all, right here. So that is a nice little cadence into A, right? It's the same thing of having a 7 to 1 as well as a 2 to 1 that we had earlier going into C, right? We had 7 to 1 in the top voice, 2 to 1 in the bottom voice here. But here it's the other way around, right? It's the 7 to 1 in the bottom voice and 2 to 1 in the top voice. And yes, that's totally fine too. But then rather than land on that cadence and end with it, you've got this really nice thing that happens after that where actually you've got this flat 2 coming down to 1. And anytime you have that happening, there's a term that's associated with that called a Phrygian cadence. And I don't know if you're familiar with that term or not. The sort of textbook Phrygian cadence would have that flat 2 to 1 in the bottom voice, but then instead of having the top voice go by a whole step up to the fifth, it would actually do it up to the root. So both these two notes would go up here. Whoops, wrong root. I didn't go high enough. I actually was thinking G. I don't know what I'm thinking. Okay, here we go. So that idea of having scale degree in A minor, scale degree 7, the lowered 7th degree. So 7 to 1 as a whole step ascending up, and then the half step descending down. That is a really kind of cool sound that's really typical of Renaissance music and early Baroque music. So what you had here was sort of a variation on that, in which instead of ascending to the tonic, you're ascending to the 5 there. But it has the same quality of that flat 2 to 1, this half step descent into our tonic, as opposed to the traditional half step ascent from 7 to 1. We're used to cadences having that leading tone to tonic. This half step coming down is something that's, part of this so-called Phrygian cadence. So, anyhow, oh, and Kika, you're a trombone player as well, so feel free to, if I'm remembering correctly, I think you are. Feel free to speak to that, because these are all good things to just be aware of. I love it that we have people who play different instruments in here, so we can talk about these sort of instrument-specific things. One other thing that's common to all instruments is breathing, right? You need to breathe. And I think you've obviously given some attention to that and actually written in breaths, right? Because realistically, sorry, my automatic light timer just kicked in. I have to wake it up. There we go. This note here, really, logically, this E is a dotted half note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And this line here is ba da 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 bum bum bum. It's, logically, this note that concludes this phrase could have been a quarter note, but this was also the practical place to breathe. So by writing it the way you've written it here, you've made that very clear. Of course, you could have written this as a quarter note and put a breath mark there, right? But there's a real typical thing that's done it's done a lot in jazz. I'm not sure how many other genres of music do this, but actually writing long notes like this, writing a half note tied to an eighth note. Classical people look at that and think this looks weird if they don't have this particular background to it. But we often do this even when we're not talking about breaths, even if there had been just nothing but rests after that, as a way of being really explicit about the cutoff. In a jazz context, anyhow, we will write half note tied to eighth note to mean not just ta, and you sort of let the air work its way through the horn. It takes a long time for air to work its way through a bass trombone, right? So when you stop your flow of air, the sound doesn't stop immediately. It's a few milliseconds later. But if you go ta and actually close off your tongue, this is probably more of a woodwind thing than a brass thing exactly, the way I'm describing it, but the idea that you're saying off on three. Don't let the air continue and fizzle out on three, but have a hard stop to the sound on three. This type of notation, half note tied to eighth, is a way that we often notate that. So sometimes you want players to breathe in different places. In a larger section, then when you have several players on one part, then you absolutely do that. That's called staggered breathing, and you let the players work that out. And that way you can have a flow. It'll sound like one continuous line. You won't be aware of the breaths because everyone's breathing in different places. In a duet, it's going to be noticeable. Yes, you could breathe in different places, but it's going to be noticeable when one person breathes and the other one doesn't. So you can work that in. You can absolutely work that into what you're doing. But be aware that it will make a sound. Like here, I'm going to play from the beginning. If I take this G and just shorten it to a quarter note, right? You heard that G drop out while the other guy was moving, and the line wasn't written for that to work, so it doesn't work. But what if the line had actually done something kind of cool there, of like, let's pretend he wants to play some 16th notes. Sorry, E. So I'm giving him some 16th notes. Let's hear this now. Now we have created something of interest to happen while the other guy's breathing, right? So if you want to write that way, write that way. But yeah, the idea of the staggered breathing as just a way of creating an even flow is going to work better with a larger section, not as well necessarily in a duet. All right, so yeah, I could talk about any one of these pieces at more length, but I want to talk about some more music, so I am going to move on in a moment. But I am just going to talk about texturally this one spot. So when I talked about texture, having different textural things going on, there's an example right there. This is the only time in the piece, really, where it breaks down into little solo spots like that. And that's kind of actually cool, right? It's like an ascending scale that passes from one instrument to another with an octave jump in it. That's something you would think about. Do you want it to go that way? So if this is exactly how you want it, great. One thing you could consider is overlapping the resolution of the line. Basically, you got, I'm going to the store to buy a dozen, and the next guy comes in with eggs, and then I went to this do other thing, right? Why not finish the sentence here? So I'm going to actually overlap them for that one note. That's a technique that you might want to think about. I'm not saying you absolutely had to do it here because it was kind of an interesting pass off there, but this helps eliminate the sense of there being a discontinuity there. It helps make things more continuous, where the guy who plays the leading tone and ends on the and actually gets to resolve to the downbeat, and meanwhile the next person comes in, so they overlap by one note. That's just a really typical way of writing those sort of passing off figures. The last thing I want to talk about was the ending. There's something interesting harmonically and rhythmically about this final cadence. So already, harmonically, we have this D sharp, which is sort of like a pitch we haven't really dealt with at all. And it's like tonicizing this E, right? It's creating a sense of a leading tone into the E. So that's kind of nice. What if I were to do that, though? I might have wanted, except this is going to mess up the other thing that I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to do it anyhow. I'm going to change that to an F sharp followed by a G sharp. And I'm going to do that so that I can hear this D sharp into E along with F sharp to E. In fact, maybe I want it to be A, because that feels like a cadence, right? That feels like 5-1 in the key of E. And in fact, what if I just made this be tied? Because it was an A right before it. I'm not saying that was better than what you had. I'm just saying that if you want to have that D sharp there to kind of tonicize that E, it'd be nice for the other voice to play along. However, the reason why I say I'm not actually going to like it better is the really cool thing that's happening here. I'm undoing all those changes. Is the hemiola here? 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1. Right. So starting with this G sharp, it's basically 2-4. Bum 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 bum. So it's 2 beats for the G sharp, 2 beats for the C, 2 beats for the E, 2 beats for the final E B. Am I singing those right? Yeah. E B, and then final A, and then the left hand. Look at me. The bass trombone joins in with a similar thing: A2, B2, E2, A. And I'm just saying 2 because it's 2 beats. I'm emphasizing that it's 2 beats long. That idea of making these 2-beat things, this final cadence, be 2 beats at a time, even though we're in 3/4. Well, we're not. Yeah, we're not in 3/4, but it's we're in 4/4, but it's phrased across the bar line like that. A typical hemiola would have actually done that in 3/4, but in any case, you're creating that same sense there. Okay, so really nice job with that. I'm going to move on and take a look. Actually, I'm going to come back to Dean's because I do want to talk about one other um, uh, piece that is a single, 2 single instruments, just to talk about some of the. And so this piece here is Jim, I believe. Let me get back to the piece. There, right here, Jim Ivy. And so this one is for 2 clarinets. And so while I'm still talking about some of those issues, let me post that into the chat there. And uh, let's hear this playback here. Nice, really fun piece. It's a lot of fun. Starting right off with one of the things that I talked about earlier, the idea of textual variety. You see what I mean now? He's created quite a bit within the context of this. We can really look at the different textures. This section, this waltz section, right? I mean, it's all in three. Well, not all, but mostly in three. Because it did. Wait a minute. Yeah, no, it doesn't. It's not all in three, but it's mostly in three. But that section, the boom, beep, beep, boom, pop, pop, boom. This has that classic waltz feel, and it's very straightforward, right? It's just quarter notes and half notes, and so and the actual accompaniment pattern of boom, chick, chick, boom, chick, boom, chick, chick, boom, chick, right? That kind of pattern. It doesn't keep that pattern throughout, because he didn't want to keep it throughout, right? He wanted to say, well, okay, I've established that I can do that, but now I'm not. I'm going to have a more flowing line. But it's still a very simple quarter note flow to both of the instruments. But then not instantly, we get, so that lasted for 16 bars. Well, an intro of 4 bars and then 16 bars of the melody. But the next phrase has a different texture, right? Here's where we get the eighth notes flowing. So what I hear happening here is that this eighth note line is kind of a elaborated version of the melody. Bum, 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 yeah, somehow in there, bum, bum, those notes are buried into the line, right? It's an elaborated version of the melody, kind of. At least that's how I'm hearing it. And so he lets that texture go on again for basically 16 bars, I assume. And then we get a different version of that. Now the parts have reversed. But it's not just that the parts have reversed. There's actually something more significant going on than just flipping of the two parts. Remember with Heiss's piece, I talked about how the bass trombone and the trombone and the tenor trombone have a different character. So even just changing which one is playing which part, the moving part versus the not moving part, they're going to have a different character to them. Well, two B-flat clarinets are not going to have as big a character, but pay attention to what's happening octave-wise. Here, the moving line is very much above the slow line. The slow line in the first clarinet are low notes, at least as low as a clarinet can play. And it's purely separated. The second clarinet is above the first clarinet, which is fine. It's above, like an octave above, really, for the most part. And so it's a very clear separation. Moving line is on the top. The slow move, the quarter note and half note line is on the bottom. And when it reverses here, it's still the case that we have now that, so the first clarinet has the eighth note line, but they are no longer an octave apart. The moving line is in the same octave it was here. So in the previous passage, the second clarinet was all kind of middle of the staff, and now it's the first clarinet that's got the eighth notes middle of the staff. But the first time that thing sounded, the first clarinet, who had the quarter note line, was in this low range. Chalumeau, is that the right French term for that range of the clarinet? I forget my terms. But here, the second clarinet part with the quarter notes is actually in the same basic range that the eighth notes are in. So they're actually overlapping each other. And so there's much more of a sense of interweaving here than there was in the first part. The first part had eighth notes on top, quarter notes on the bottom, pretty clearly. Here, they're interweaving. Right? And so now even that little passage of parallel thirds, they're really thirds, not tenths. And so it's a different texture. So not only did the rolls reverse, but the intervals closened, so that they were an octave apart, and now they're actually overlapping. They're overlapping to the point where there's probably some places where they literally have the same pitch. Is that literally true, or did you try to avoid that? He might have tried to avoid that. So, Jim, you can tell me if you actually did try to avoid that. I can tell you that computer playback, when you have unisons, the same note in two different instruments, is a little disappointing. It's actually funny because I thought there were overlaps, but like where you literally have the same pitch in both instruments, but it actually looks like you've avoided that. So you must have gone out of your way. Like I look at places like this, the bottom voice has an F, the top voice has a G, so no one's got the same part. Now the bottom voice goes up to an A while the top voice comes down to an F. So they've crossed, but they're not ever sitting on literally the same pitch. Computer playback will cause all sorts of audio artifacts if you do that, because the amplitudes of the waveforms will overlap because it's literally the same waveform duplicating itself. Real instruments won't generally do that because everyone's tone is a little different. But with computer playback, if you have the same literal note in two different instruments, like the same literal note on both clarinets, they will literally use the same wave file, and they will overlap and create strange artifacts. And so you can be fooled into thinking that something isn't going to work, even though in real life it does. But yeah, as I'm looking at this, all these places where I thought I was hearing the intertwining and was imagining that somewhere you literally have the same pitch in both voices. But as I look more closely, it looks like you have pretty studiously avoided ever doing that. So, and that's good. I mean, it's going to stand out a little bit, even with real instruments, when they come together on a unison like that, because it's going to sound like the harmony disappeared. Octaves are a little different than unisons. We'll hear the octave. I mean, we hear the harmony disappearing a little bit when the notes are in octaves, but if they're on a unison, it's that much more. And for that matter, well, this is concert pitch. Concert G is A on the clarinet, and that is like the weakest note. Well, B flat's the weakest note, but it's a pretty weak sounding note, and it's sort of an odd sounding note to ever have a unison on. Now, Jim, I don't know. Do you play clarinet? Did you say if you played clarinet? Because the one thing about it is when we talk about playability. I look at this as a former clarinet player, and mostly it's not too hard to play. However, I'm going to turn concert pitch off so I can really understand what's happening. I will tell you that this passage here is across the break, right? A clarinet, you're lifting fingers up one at a time, and you get to the A, and then you have to put all your fingers back down for the B. Anytime you're going back and forth between A and B like that, it's a lot of fingers moving. And so I'm not saying it can't be played, but I'm saying that that's one of the things you watch out for if you're trying to write for easy playability, that you don't write anything, you don't force them to go back and forth across that break. If he just has to do it once, like this whole line, da, 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 all sits in that, all fingers down range. Then we play the B, and then we switch over to A, G, A, B, A. If you had kept this line, instead of going up to a B, if it had gone anywhere else lower than that, then it would have avoided having to stick all the fingers down and then take them all off again, because then we get to live down in the very few fingers down range for a while. So really, this B here to me feels fine because it's coming right off that one. It's this B right here that is the one note that you have to put all your fingers down and come right back down for. That's going to be the hardest type of thing to play in this piece. So if I just change this, I'm going to change it to an F sharp, make it be a 5 chord. So I'm not saying that it's a better melody or anything, but I will say this has now instantly become a lot more playable by changing that F sharp, changing that B to an F sharp. Or you could have changed it to another G. I just didn't want it to sound too repetitive. and that could be fine too. Anyhow, those are some things to watch out for. All woodwind instruments have a break like that. The clarinet is the most problematic of all the woodwinds going across the break, because those notes at the top of that range aren't notes that exist on other instruments, right? As soon as they run out of fingers, then they come right down. On clarinet, you run out of fingers, and then you have all these extra little keys up here, and that whole business of the of it being a 12th, right? It's not an octave and then put your fingers back down. It's a 12th. You go from low E all the way up to high B flat, then come back down for a B. The same note that's a low E is a low E is then a B in the next register. So the same fingering is both an E and a B. That's something clarinet players have to deal with, but it does mean that break is not just a break of an octave, but it's a break of a 12th, which actually affects the embouchure that much more also. So absolutely. Oh yeah, the cursor key. Thank you. The cursor thing. Let me do that. Thanks for reminding me. I will eventually, hopefully, get to the point of remembering that kind of stuff. There's my cursor, and while I'm at it, keystrokes, right? Okay. So yes, you can cheat, and there are trill fingerings you can use for that B, but it's not going to really help you that much. You've just played everything else up there. I might try that. I mean, the trill fingerings don't sound so good. They're a little out of tune, and they are what they are. But you could certainly. You could certainly try. So, Colleen, I know you, if you're still with us, you play clarinet enough. I don't remember, and I don't. Well, I do actually have my silver clarinet here, and I need to get it working. So the B, if we use the alternate fingering for the B, you could probably get away with it because it's in the middle of a line there. Absolutely. But then you have to assume, if you're writing for like school players, that they know about that. You might want to write that in the notes. Anyhow, those are some things to think about. But so then you've got another texture here. Now it goes into a kind of a more of a march kind of thing instead of the waltz thing. And that's really nice too. And I really like that. Now, this idea that we have a melody that we normally think of as being in 3. Right? Now we're taking that same melody that's normally in 3 and expressing it in 4. This is a common thing to do. It's a common thing to do, at least in my world as a jazz musician, because we are so accustomed to playing jazz, and yet there's so many great songs that we might want to play that were originally in 3. And we're like, by gosh, I'm going to just make this thing be in 4. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we just let them be waltzes. But often we will swingify them, jazz 4/4ify them. This is marchifying it. Now here we do get the repeated G, right? So we get the G and G, but that's fine. They started off as a different pitch, and then this one came up. Totally fine. Now you could actually think about, I like how that terminated the phrase with the G, but just for the sake of trying something, I want to make that be a B so that I can actually hear the third of the chord there and avoid the unison. I'm not going to like it better. Yeah, it's okay. So what I did was, if I decided I didn't want that unison, I would look at this measure and say, well, gee, all I've got is a root. If I want to add anything, I want to add a fifth. So I'm going to let that ba-ba-bum be the fifth. I mean, I want to have a third, not a fifth. And so I let it be a third. So anyhow, that's just something else you could try. But there was something nice about the ba-da-dum, having it actually be the tonic. Now, you could save that for the ends of phrases. Like, that made this phrase feel a little more final. Bum, ba-da-dum, by giving me the ba-da-dum on the actual tonic, and not having it harmonize at all. The roots in the melody, or the tonic is in the melody, and it's in the accompaniment. It makes it feel like the phrase has a little bit come to an end there. That could be a reason to use the B, and yet it totally the problem is, this is one of those places where if you were writing this for an actual marching band, that wouldn't come up. You'd have the whole chord to deal with as it is. It's the fact that that we only have two instruments, that you have to start asking these questions. And another thing you would consider is, well, maybe I don't need the ba ba bum figure. Maybe I want to add that at the end of the 4 bars, but not at the end of 2. Maybe that's the solution. So if I change this figure to just being quarter notes, G, and then D, now make it be a B so I can hear the third, and then A. I'll make it be a C, and then a B. I'm looking at what's going on. So G and B go against the other G here, forms a G chord. The C and the F sharp implies the 5 chord, D chord, and then resolving to B and G again. So here I've elected to put off the ba-ba-bum little gesture there in an effort to maybe have it have a little more flow. I want to hear it from the intro of that section. And so, of course, you could make the same choice of bump, 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 bump here and go 5 and then I want to hear that. So, thinking about where you're using the bump bada dumps, because that's a very specific gesture that has, it is like a little it's a semicolon or something you put at the end of things. It's not quite a period. It's only a period if you bada dump bump bump, and bada dump. Ba-da-dum-bum-bum. You have to have a little extra little thing on it, the extra note that says, oh, this is the end of the phrase. So by paying attention to where you're using that gesture, I'm not saying you didn't pay attention, but that's one of the things that I'm thinking about is, where do I want it? Where do I feel like, no, I think I'm going to hold off on that. So that's something else to think about here. And here again, we have more of a back and forth overlapping kind of thing going on. So, yeah, so really marvelous stuff going on in here, and I'm just making some observations about some alternate things that one could try if you are trying to write a piece that has this overall feel. We eventually come back to the simpler texture that we started, but much slower. You're calling that andante. I guess technically maybe it falls into that range, but it feels so much slower that I feel like I would want a tempo marking. What is the tempo right here? 92. Yeah, so in someone's book, 92 is andante, but after all that faster stuff, it feels like we've slowed down a lot. And so if I were putting an Italian term on for the tempo, I might use a term that conveys slowing down a lot more. Meno mosso, less motion, but that doesn't say how much less motion. You might be more specific with your tempo marking, or when someone goes to play this, my guess is they instinctively won't slow down as much as you actually intended here, is my guess. And then I'll have the little finish. Yeah, lovely little finish to it. So, great there. Okay, so I'm going to play a little bit of Dean's, but I want to come back and devote more time to this next week, because it's got a whole other thing going on involving the piano accompaniment. But I'm going to play, because I want to play a little bit of it and jump through and then talk about it more, but I also want to take a quick look at something else that I'd like you to see. So, kind of interesting that he's using trombone for the playback, right? But let's hear. All right. So I'm stopping there. Sorry about that, Dean, but because I want to give it the time and attention it deserves. On a time when I'm talking about more piano duets. So hopefully, someone else will write things with piano because it's going to open a whole new avenue of things to talk about. And so I'd love to be able to talk about this in conjunction with something else that someone is writing for piano. So if I'm not mistaken, Joanne, you said that you were writing for something with a duet with piano accompaniment. So this is essentially that, right? This is voice, even though we're hearing a trombone synthesized playback. This is basically voice with piano accompaniment. So this is a good model for you. Joanne, I would look at this piece because I think he's doing a lot of things really, really well, and then I will talk about them in more detail. But I jump in in the community and post, comment on it. I just posted the link to it here. There's the link. Go there, check it out, and then ask some questions about some stuff. But yeah, there's all sorts of things you can talk about. Like I mentioned in the cafe yesterday when talking about orchestral writing, when do you have the accompaniment? I was talking about opera specifically. When do you let the accompaniment double the melody? Well, he's doing that right here. Right? The accompaniment is doubling the melody, but then almost immediately, it's not doubling anymore. It's in rhythm with it. It's homophonic with it, or yeah, that's as good a term as any. It's all the notes together. It's a tutti, really, when you get down to it. It's a melody that's each note of the melody is harmonized, but the melody itself is not doubled. Actually, two of the notes are, but an octave lower. But there's no F in that voicing. And then other places also, like here. Here again, the B flat was not actually in the voicing that accompanied it. With the A flat, it is in there, but it's down in a lower octave, and then the G flat is doubled in a different octave than the A flat was in. So it's got the same notes, some of the same notes, only because, well, they're good notes, but it's not doubling the melody. And then also through here, right, those eighth notes going up are not doubled in the accompaniment. So it's a good style of accompaniment to have that, place where you basically are establishing something in your accompaniment. You double when you want to, but don't feel compelled to do it. And I like that approach personally, because doubling the melody can get old. You do it when you want to do it, but definitely don't feel like you should always be doing it. Here, he's got a nice passage where he does it. Right? So that melody is doubled in the top note of that arpeggio pattern in the piano. So anyhow, look at this. It's a really nice model for this. I will also tell you, well, I'm gonna post the link here. I'm going to show you one other thing. In the cafe yesterday, I talked about the open score project, but there's a very specific subset of it called the Leader Corpus, which is an amazing, just absolutely incredible resource of basically mostly like 19th century art songs, but they're all over the place. But that's sort of like the sort of average of where they're coming from. Just an incredible number of these things that have been entered and really painstakingly edited, and done in a really professional way. And they tend to use oboe as the piano, as the voice. Anyhow, the Leader Corpus is, there's all these songs by Schubert and Schumann and all the sort of usual suspects of people you might expect. So that's called the Leader Corpus. So that's definitely some great models to check out there. So the last thing that I actually want to check out here is just because I mentioned that I wanted to. So Brian Collins, who just joined us here, is going through the harmony course. And for those of you who are like, kind of new to what's going on here, I have this masterclass series that I do. And I also have these online courses in which I, present much more focused, like, okay, we're going to just talk about secondary dominants. I'll have like a little 15-minute lecture explaining what secondary dominants are and how they work and so forth. And then there's exercises that you can complete and post as part of things. And Brian has posted this, and I just want to play this. Most of the exercises that I do in the harmony course are these like simple folk songs. A, because I don't have to worry anything about copyright. B, because they're very flexible in terms of the harmonies they support. We can hear Home on the Range with different harmonizations and be happy. So I'm going to play this for a second and then talk. Okay, nice job, Brian. So the purpose of the particular exercise here, this is not like the exercise you do after you've learned everything in the course. No, this is actually the preparation exercise for what you eventually learn in the course. I'll post this into the chat also so that we can talk about. So yeah, Joanne, just if you're not already signed up for my MuseScore course, I highly recommend that also to get better at entering notes and everything else about using MuseScore. But the some of this exercise here, again, it's not the culmination of learning about harmony, it's a preparation for it. And the idea is, if I tell you that this, a secondary dominant is this type of chord, you use it here in this situation and play this chord here and it's going to sound really cool. If you don't know how to actually write that chord for four voices and make it sound good, and with the voice leading and all, you're never going to fully appreciate what a secondary dominant is. And the same for borrowed chords, same for augmented sixth chords, diminished approach chords, all these other types of chords that I talk about in the course. So one of the things that I like people to be able to do is write a purely diatonic song. In other words, write a chord progression in which all the chords, there's not a single accidental anywhere in here, because that was the assignment, not to use any chords that go outside the key, but to try to make the chords that you use make sense, and then make the voice leading make sense between them. So you're hearing the chords in a way that makes sense. Because as soon as we start introducing chords that go outside the key, then there's a danger that you're just going to play the chord and then not voice lead it to the next chord well. You're not going to connect it well, and you're going to think, oh, that chord doesn't actually make sense. I'm not going to use that chord. So by getting practice doing that in a controlled setting of just using diatonic chords, it's really useful. So in any case, that's the point of this particular exercise, and I think he's done a really good job of that. The voice leading is really nice kind of throughout. There's only a few places that jump out at me. I was talking about open fifths before. I hear that, right? I heard that there's no third in that chord. I totally heard the absence of the third. So what I would probably do is take that C up to an E. And now I get to hear an E in that chord. I would have done it there. The other place you could have done it, is maybe bringing that back down to the C, but let the bass go down to an E. I like that a lot, actually. So, you'd have to ask, well, are you really going to, again, when we talk about ability levels, if this is writing for a young choir, they probably don't have anyone who could sing that low E, but that's okay. This is more of an exercise than literally caring about the singability of the thing. So is OpenScore accepting transcribers? Yes, OpenScore is, but it's they are sort of understaffed as far as the editing goes. So it's the Leader Corpus is hugely active, and so if you want to get involved in OpenScore, the Leader Corpus is absolutely a great place to do it, because they'll have more than enough for you to do. But within the OpenScore project, it's sort of like there's bottlenecks. There's like, oh well, we've got too much of this, not enough of that going on. So you'd have to actually check in with them about that. And I don't actually even know the process for it, but Google for OpenScore. I know Peter Jonas is the person, and so you could probably eventually figure out a way, a direct contact for him. But I would go through whatever channels you find by actually just doing web searches on OpenScore. So in any case, yeah, I think this was a really nice job of Voicely and everything else, and that there was just that one spot that I thought was worthy of comment when I saw that open fifth, when I heard that open fifth, because that's what happened. I hear these things, then I see them. Occasionally, it's the other way around, but mostly it's about what I hear. Okay, so on that note, I'm going to get ready to sign off here. So I hope everyone has gotten something out of the session today. And again, my name is Marc Sabatella with the Mastering MuseScore School. This has been the Music Masterclass, and I do this every Thursday, so just come back for more. And by all means, submit your own music. At the top of the chat, I've pinned the link to the community in general. So, if you're not already signed up, do that. It's totally free. You're welcome to also, though, and I encourage, become an all-access member and get access to all the courses that I offer and all the special private areas and so forth. But you're totally welcome to join for free and post your music into the community. We've got that share, the share and discuss space for just general discussion, and we've got the challenges space for if you want to be submitting any duets. And look forward to hearing some more music and talking about some more music next time. Okay, so see you all next week and around in the community.